I remember when plastic came into this world. It was within my lifetime, and how we really, at the time of its introduction, suspected that it wasn't going to be good for us, even as kids.
So I see 2020 as a watershed year in we have an opportunity to change everything.
Absolutely.
Yes, well said. I absolutely agree, Cristina. I think this is the turning point. This is where we can pivot, where we can literally shift our sails and go in the other direction toward a bigger and brighter future.
How can we possibly expect people to understand and to be motivated to care about the oceans when they've never even had that amazing connection that we are all so privileged to have felt? Thanks for that one. How about you, Peter? Another way of looking at it could be...
Well, I think your comment that you just made there about how do you make people connect, and I think the most evocative one, you know, even if you're living in the middle of Europe somewhere, is the fact that every second breath you're taking is coming from the ocean. Right? I mean, you know, this is critical 2020 work. If your country, and I think looking at you all there, all of your countries are members of CAMLA, which is the organization that runs the Antarctica and the surrounding waters, right to your minister now, because it has to be done over the next month, because the CAMLA meeting is in October. And that's when they will make the decision on these 3 gigantic MPAs. It'll be the biggest step that humanity has ever taken in terms of preserving parts of the planet. When I look back on 2020 I think I would say that it was the year when we realized that, you know, the individual is not quite as important as we've always thought, that, you know, greed and ambition and all those things that have driven us all individually is actually not the answer. Our connectivity to each other, to everything in the world, that was the message of COVID. The message of COVID is not really about saving lives, because pandemic will always go like the Grim Reaper through populations. But pandemics will never wipe out populations. You know, this is not the end of humanity by any means. And we will recover from this wiser and stronger. But what we will not recover from is our greenhouse gas emission habits and behaviors. And therefore, the important thing that we learned in 2020, this is if we learn the lesson correctly.
We will.
Is that we have to get our greenhouse gas emissions under control or suffer the consequences. And the consequences, pandemic is just one of the consequences. There's a whole Malthusian list of about another 10 of them that are coming at us in the 21st century if we didn't get 2020 right.
Why is conservation so important, and what can we do to ensure these biodiverse areas are protected and encouraged? You talked a bit about Antarctica, but how else can we learn from the people that protect these areas, and how can we kind of ensure biodiversity is incentivized?
So two thoughts come to mind, and the first one is, you know, as conservationists, we've always thought that we were doing the right thing, but as you study things in this light of racism and oppression, you realize that conservation has been very colonial as well. And the economic models that guide, you know, what Peter was just saying, are also a product of you know, oppressed societies. Think about this. What is it? 90% of the wealth on this planet is in the hands of 1%, and that 1% is white. So until we get a more equal distribution of wealth to reach those communities and make it more equitable, it's impossible for you know, to actually achieve conservation. So I'm very glad that we're starting to look at things through that lens. And the other thing that came to my mind when you were thinking about how do we achieve conservation and biodiversity protection, I've been thinking a lot about the role of women in all of this. And when we think about you know, equality, we think about, you know, minorities being able to participate more fully. But among those minorities, and I'm sure you're going to agree with me, Danny, women are so underrepresented in general, girls. And I don't think we can solve any of these issues until we lift girls up and bring them into, you know, careers in science and careers in conservation and careers in the, you know, in the arts and communication. So I think we just have to rethink how we had been looking at all of this. I was asking two friends of mine who are scholars in conservation, I was saying, why do we not see more minorities working in these fields? And the answer shocked me. They say, when you're too busy surviving and when you're too busy, fighting oppression, you have no time to think about, climate change or biodiversity loss. Mm-hmm. So we have to make sure that people have time to think about those things by making sure that they are able to survive.
Well, I come from a place where the indigenous people who've been in Fiji for over 4,000 years, very much the majority of the population, and have always formed government. And so it comes as no surprise for me to find the rest of the world waking up to the fact that indigenous thought is so important to conservation. Certainly, I find from my time at the United Nations that is a growing realization. Secondly, on the gender thing that you've mentioned, from the ocean's point of view, that's a given. Fisheries, again, coming from Fiji, women do the fishing, and fish markets anywhere in the world are run by women, and increasingly, I think, ocean science, women in ocean science. It's very rare for me now to attend some webinar or something where 50% of the ocean science people are young women, or not necessarily young women. I think the group that we haven't mentioned is youth, and that has to be more than window dressing. You more and more you see sort of a young person put in at the beginning or the end of a meeting, just to make so the organizers can show that they've paid attention to that sector. But it has to be a lot more than that. It has to be the thinking of young people has to be imbued. And I say that because, as I was referring to earlier, we can't go back to our old ways, right? The old ways of plastic polluting, fossil fuel burning world. That's just, it's a terminal road, right? Now, young people, because they're more idealistic and less attached to that old world, are really the champions logically of the sustainable world, what I like to call the blue-green recovery from this global recession, which we're just getting into now, to make that a blue-green recovery road. And I think the importance of having young people speak for it, because it's going to be their recovery road. Eventually they're going to be the ones coming out of it. So I would speak for youth. And having said that, all my granddaughters are girls, so that's why I'm prejudiced in that regard.
And I really believe that if we empower women and girls to be the leaders and stewards of our planet, that we will see the change, because women and girls are inherently collaborative. We're intuitive, no shade to men at all, but we all have our skill sets and we have our strengths. And I think if we pull in and pull from those strengths in women and girls, we're going to see a massive shift.
We are going to need to lift up and empower and educate girls to be part of the solution. I grew up in a Catholic family in Mexico, and my brother was the king. He was the one that was given the opportunities. When my father came home with the Jacques Cousteau books, they were for my brother, because he was the boy in the family. And I see this all over the world. If there's an opportunity for a poor family to send one kid to school, it's going to be a boy. And, we are wasting all the brain power that girls can offer. So it's not about being a feminist. It's about understanding that all the brain power. And so let's lift girls. But when it comes to enoughness, the journey to understand it started really simple. You go to these places that are remote, where people don't have access to Walmart lifestyles, and you realize that they live with so much less, and yet their lives seem to be so much fuller. And again, you really have to shed your layers of privilege and capitalism to understand why. And it's because the sense of abundance and happiness in our lives doesn't come from the stuff we have. We all need to have enough to survive, to know that there's a meal coming, that there's shelter for us. But after that, the way that we fill our souls is with other stuff. So, your pride in who you are, your language, your traditions, the connections that you have to your family, to your community. I think all of you will agree that doing meaningful work that gets you out of bed in the morning to feel good about the stuff that you do, all of that makes you feel like you have enough. And when you have enough, then you can give back. And you know, you realize that the measure of what is it, of generosity in indigenous people is not by, you know, saying this is how much I have, but this is how much I give. And I think we all can learn from that. So in COVID-19, I think we all got a big lesson in enoughness as we stay sheltered in place and we have to curb our consumerism, our capitalism, and you realize and you see, of course I can live with so much less and still be happy, you know. And all of this consumerism, which is, you said capitalism, consumerism, and corporate greed, all of these things are intertwined into this idea, and I can't wait to hear what Peter says about this, you know, that the GDP has to grow at all costs. And I think we're measuring, our metrics for happiness are so misguided, you know, when it's all about how much money and how much wealth, instead of by how happy and how much well-being there is in the population. And we're seeing that this doesn't work. And you know, I'm not advocating to end capitalism. I just think we need to rethink it, because when you have an economic system that leaves humanity and that leaves nature behind, and we're seeing the consequences of it now, there's something really wrong, and we cannot go back to that.
Gandhi's thing of, you know, there's enough in the world for everybody's need, but not enough for everybody's greed. And that's the thing, greed, you know, we all have a bit of that in us. Whatever our sex, whatever our age, whatever our nationality, everybody wants a little bit more. So that's what we've got to learn to control within ourselves, within our societies. And I'm really going to be interested in what you have to say about enoughness, because that's where we're going.
Yeah, if I may, you know, elaborate just on the thought, because it's so true, Peter. So I always saw enoughness as it's like a personal thing, which is what I like about it so much. So just like you practice yoga and you practice, you know, financial discipline, you can practice enoughness. And I practice it every day. You know, I go to the grocery store, to the store, and if I see something, I really ask myself, you know, is this something I need or something I want? And it's so funny, because the minute you walk away from that shiny thing that attracted your attention, you forget about it. If you buy it and you walk away with it, 2 minutes later, you've forgotten about it too. I find that the more stuff you have, the less happy you are. You know, the stuff just burdens you. You have to maintain it, clean it, store it, insure it. You know, it holds you down. You cannot travel because you have to, you know, stay on top of all your shit, you know, the stuff that you have. So I find that enoughness has been really liberating. And if we all practice it just a little to make sure that everybody else also has enough, I think we're all going to be a lot happier.
Well, here in the United States, I think that the idea of capitalism is the thread that keeps this country together, but we're seeing it all being pulled apart right now. And the reason being is that so many people are living in desperate situations in the midst of a country that claims to be the most wealthy or the most prosperous. And all of these material items are flaunted in front of our faces constantly through advertising. And this idea of happiness is directly connected to wealth. And that's a thought process that I don't personally hold on to, because I was, you know, because of my connection to the ocean as a child, I kind of understood that my enoughness was literally being able to snorkel every day and go outside and just hang out. And like, that's what fed me and has continued to feed me to this day. You know, social entrepreneurship is the business model of the future. And what does that even look like? It's where companies give back more than they receive. And it may not make sense now because we want to all make profit, but at this point, I believe we have to restructure our economy to become circular, because right now we're on a linear path that ends to a dead end. Yeah. So circular economies, that's where it's at.
We're talking about deep sea mining. People are saying that, you know, deep sea mining promises to deliver the minerals that we need to power our technology, our future. But those same materials, you know, and getting them could cause a lot of damage to much of the ocean that we still don't know about. What's your solution to that? I mean, we even talked about how we should perhaps be reducing the amount, the population size. Should we be encouraging people to be having less babies? Like how could we do something radical and dramatic?
I think we just need to go back to the SDGs. Am I right, Peter? the SDGs say that if you educate girls, and this is something I've seen and experienced around the world, when you ask women, even in the most remote villages where they haven't had access to education, what they want is they want to control their reproductive future. You know, they want to have control over how many children they have and when they have them. And right now, that is denied to so many women. But the minute you educate girls and you give them a different aspiration, you know, then becoming this childbirthing machine is no longer part of who they are.
And if we were able to give the ocean enough time, just some breathing room, some space to recover and replenish itself, we'll see that, you know, artisanal fishermen, not industrial fishermen, artisanal fishermen will have enough to feed their families in places that still heavily rely on the ocean for their sustenance. But the more that we continue to feed into this demand for a nice, you know, mahi steak at a restaurant in you know, other countries that don't have a connection to the ocean in that way, where they're going out and catching their own fish, we're not going to see any of this change. And so deep sea mining it's the same concept. We're going in to take and extract materials out of a place we've never even been to. How does that even make sense?
It's a mixed bag as to what's happened over the last 2 years, but what you can take from it is that the big stocks of, you know, things like herrings and tuna and so on are going to continue to be available. I cannot foresee a world where the billions of people who currently depend on fish for their protein will stop doing that. But I do think that management of those activities is the key to conservation. We've really got to put more resources into management of the fishing industry to make sure that all that illegal fishing and all the rest and taking of unsustainable stocks, because those are the ones that are under danger, that 33%, that stops.
You know, the amount of money that goes into solving these issues is still pathetic. In 2017, Americans, who are the most charitable people on this planet, donated $420 billion to charity, all causes. Of that, 32% went to religious causes, and from there it went down to health, education, the arts, humanities, all of it very important. At the bottom of that, 1.8% went to a big category called the environment. And that includes all of the oceans, all of our planet's biodiversity, the entire Amazon rainforest, plus all dogs, cats, and horses. So it seems to me that if we're going to solve these issues, we better start praying, or we better start redirecting our contributions that are, you know, to charitable institutions to solving these big problems in our planet.
I just want to end on my vision of 2030 and what I hope that it'll look like. And I think I can boil it down to just a couple of things. First, like I mentioned in the very beginning of our talk, I would love to see that all children around the world have basic skill set of swimming. Secondly, I'd like to see educators uplifted and appreciated and compensated properly, and that their place in our societies are at the very top. I'd love to see clean energy everywhere, that we've stopped extracting fossil fuels from beneath the Earth's crust, and that we are now harnessing the energy of the sun, wind, water, and geothermal energies. And then finally, I'd like to see racism and oppression eradicated from our consciousness, and that it's no longer something that we need to talk about or address because it has been solved.
I just want to say thanks to my fellow panelists. It's been really a great hour, and to all the people in the chat room. Great questions. It's been a privilege being on this panel. Final sentence is a question to you all. What are you doing as individuals, as companies, as schools, whatever your community group, whatever your country is, what are you doing to get to carbon neutrality? Because that is what's going to save us. Thank you.
Mr. UN. Thank you, Peter.
Yes. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Cristina. And thank you, Iona, for moderating today.
Yes, it was
Really
so much fun talking to you both for hours. Thank you. Keep inspiring everyone.
Thanks, everyone.